Mr Speaker, as the former chair of the Commerce Committee in the previous Parliament, I rise to support the passage of the Fair Trading Soliciting on behalf of Charities Amendment Bill. And I think the sequence of events in terms of who's had this bill in their name has added some interest in terms of the contribution of the member who's just resumed her seat. Because, of course, this bill was originally in the name of one Amy Adams, who quite rightly was promoted to Cabinet after the last general election. And I think I think my colleague here keeps getting her confused with the famous actor called Amy Adams. So, no, unfortunately, she was not in the Muppet Show, and she wasn't in doubt either. So I have to convince him that this is not the case. There's just a coincidence of name, But and unfortunately, this member here is distracting me from a very serious contribution that I want to make, because this is an important matter, and I'm also. The reason that I want to make these comments is because of the nature of the contributions of the various members. When Amy Adams brought this bill in front of the committee, we ensured that she became part of the deliberation process of the Select Committee, so she was able to sit in at a time we were hearing submissions and to contribute and discuss with officials the way that we were going to resolve the bill, because I think she brought a bill to the House under a private member's bill process, and this, unlike some of the other bills that we've dealt with tonight, is an extremely good example of how a private member can actually use the private member's bill process to advance good law and make some very positive changes that can gain the support of the whole House. And I don't think anyone will get up and oppose this particular bill tonight. But when she introduced the bill, and this is one of the deficits of our current process in creating private members' bills, is that we don't simply have the skill sets for drafting complex pieces of legislation. No matter how simple they appear on the surface, they can in fact be quite complex underneath. Now, we have the secret weapon of one Charles Javel, a sort of very prestigious, well-renowned partner in a major law firm in Wellington, to call upon in order to enable us to get good private members' bills into the ballot. But this one suffered from a particular problem in that the intention was well thought through. The mechanism for delivery was not. And the Select Committee, in fact, had to do considerable work in changing this into a provision that created a regulation-making power rather than trying to deal with the problem in the law itself. And I'm sorry, but I am being distracted by my very good colleague in front of me. But the point that I'm making in relation to this bill is that Amy Adams certainly had, in a very short period of time in this House, set herself apart and was an obvious choice for the government when looking to introduce a new cabinet after the last general election. This bill now sits in the name of one Michael Woodhouse. Now, the fact that he wasn't speaking to his bill suggests that he may in fact be in consultation right now over his future. And it may well be that the name of this bill will transfer to somebody else in the very near future. And we congratulate him in advance if that is the case. I want to comment on the substance of the legislation, because although we've had a very good contribution from Louise Upston on behalf of Michael Woodhouse, I think that there's been something that's been completely missed, and I just want to remind people, and I've downloaded this off the internet just before I came down to the House, because I'd kind of forgotten what the name of this person was, but I know that my colleague Ruth Dyson's going to remember this case very well. A man accused of pretending to be disabled to scam money is still selling pens for $20 on behalf of a charity that has told him to stop. John Peters, a Christchurch man who says he travels the country as a professional fundraiser, was in Wellington last week selling pens bearing a Wheelchair Tennis New Zealand logo. Well, I also know that he also sold pens for something called the Disabled Children's Trust as well. Anyway, he went on to say that Wheelchair Tennis Administrator Amanda Hill confirmed the charity had accepted money from Mr Peters in recent years, but had written to him in October telling him to stop selling the pens. Now, the difficulty with Mr Peters was that he actually took money off people selling these pens, and they were for a paraplegic organisation, with a rug over his legs to make it look as if he was sitting in a wheelchair, which is actually quite disgraceful when one thinks about it. But the interesting thing about Mr Peters that really sets him apart from most other people by that name is that he is a former ACT Party candidate. And as a former ACT Party candidate who still owned 9 rental properties while he was doing this, he said to the media, he told the Dominion Post, that he was asset rich, but he was cash poor. And, and so I just thought, well, this is a terrible thing to be allowed to be got away with. And actually this bill will go some way to ensuring that he has to disclose the fact that he sells the pens for $20 but donates only $5 of that $20 to the charity of his particular choosing. He'll have to disclose that under the regulations when they are formed, but there is nothing in this bill that will stop him from actually doing that at all. And I think that that is a flaw in the legislation, which we were advised would be picked up in the Consumer Law Review. And if one reads the commentary from the Select Committee, we concluded our commentary by saying we are advised that there is likely to be significant amendment of the Fair Trading Act resulting from the review of consumer law that the government is undertaking, consideration of whether to require disclosure by collectors would fit within the wider context of the part of the review, looking at possible additional best practice enforcement tools for consumer protection and promoting business competition. Well, that bill is now finally in front of the House. It has actually gone to a select committee and submissions have been called for on it. And we did discuss with the former member, now the Minister, Amy Adams, whether we should hold this bill over for the process of the consumer law reform legislation. And in fact, she felt passionate about this and said, no, we should hold it, we should carry on with this bill regardless of the advancement of the consumer law protection legislation and include this rather than including it within it. There's another bill on the order paper further down, the Consumer Guarantees Amendment Bill, where the Select Committee and the member in charge of the bill actually decided exactly that course of action. And I hope that when we finally do get to the Consumer Guarantees Amendment Bill, that will be discharged and basically withdrawn from the order paper. I mean, all credit to Dr. Jackie Blue. But in that particular case, it was agreed that it wouldn't proceed, that it would be subsumed within the consumer law reform legislation, which it has been. This one, on the other hand, the Fair Trading Soliciting on Behalf of Charities Amendment Bill, stands on its own merits, and it is to the credit of Amy Adams, and I believe to the credit of the process of the private members' bill process that we are able to support its passage through the House. So I'm very pleased that we've had the opportunity finally tonight to debate a bill that's worthy of this House's time, and I commend its passage to the House.
Todd McClay.
Mr Speaker, thank you. It gives me a pleasure to rise and speak on this bill, the Fair